Let's get into your journey. Tell me a little bit about your faith life growing up. What was the kind of initial genesis of your love of Jesus Christ, and go from there, maybe.
Yeah, well, Jared, I like a lot of young people in America now, though it was more unusual in the early '60s. My parents divorced, and when your family shatters as a child, often your grandparents have an outsized role in your upbringing. Mm-hmm. That was true for me. My maternal grandfather and my paternal grandmother were very influential. My maternal grandfather was a Quaker farmer in central Kansas, in Stafford, Kansas. And my brother and I spent our summers with him. And I knew it was special at the time. As I got older, the specialness of it was even more pronounced because he was kind of a Wendell kind of character, really a sage, kind of lived off the fast track of American society. Mm-hmm. He always farmed 180 acres. He had the same tractor the whole time. It was with him. And so he just lived a very simple, humble life, and it made a big imprint on my soul. I was virtually unchurched until I was in high school, but he was a big influence. My paternal grandmother, she had 10 children. She wasn't Catholic. Wow. She was old school Baptist.
Okay, yeah.
And she was what I call a salty saint, and had a huge influence, and I think prayed me into the kingdom of God. I moved to Texas when I was a teenager from Kansas, and started going to an interdenominational youth group. But if you've ever been in Texas, you realize that, everybody's Baptist in Texas.
Oh, yeah.
Even the Catholics are Baptist in Texas. So, in fact, my first girlfriend was a Roman Catholic, very devout. We kind of came up together in this youth group, and she ended up becoming a Wycliffe Bible translator, and I ended up becoming an Episcopal priest.
Okay.
And we're still dear friends, and we keep in touch. But if you've seen the movie, The Jesus Revolution, mm-hmm. the tail end of that, swept into Texas, and a singer by the name of Keith Green moved to a town in East Texas called Lindell, and there was a British holiness preacher by the name of Leonard Ravenhill who had a big influence on Keith Green, and then a lot of us young people would go there. Mm-hmm. My girlfriend was in Nacogdoches, Texas, at Stephen F. Austin, and I was in Dallas, and we would meet in Lindale sometimes. And so it was that environment that really, I really encountered the resurrected Christ as a young man, and it was very influential, obviously, and in many ways it never left me. He never left me.
Yeah. So what was your journey then into Episcopalianism?
Well, when I was not a good Baptist. I read a lot of Anglicans at the time, not really knowing. I didn't read them because they were Anglicans, but the C.S. Lewis, Chesterton, who converted, but I read a lot of his Anglican stuff, and I read others, and I just realized it resonated deeply with me, so I went to an Episcopal church service, and I met the resurrected Christ there. I think there's a deficiency in their understanding of the Eucharist, but they get as close as possible for a Protestant.
Sure.
And but it was real. It was genuine, and so I transferred. I was in a Baptist school. I went to an Episcopal seminary, and I got confirmed when I graduated.
Okay.
And then I went to Little Rock to serve a parish down there, and had a beautiful 5 years with a wonderful mentor. But all along, I'm still on the journey. And it was when I moved back to Kansas City, my boyhood home, in my early 30s. I met Elizabeth, who became my wife. We started our family. And it was about that time the first bishop, high-ranking official, divorced his wife, married a man. And there was a big conversation about it, and the bishops came back and said after committee work, well, he shouldn't have done it, violated canons, but there's no core doctrine of marriage in the Episcopal Church. And I remember looking at my young wife, and I didn't marry until I was in my 30s, well into my 30s, and there was a long journey of healing and recovery to even know what a family was. And I looked at her and I said, this can't be true. This pass the smell test. There's no core doctrine in our tradition about marriage. And, well, after many years, I found out they were actually telling the truth, and that was part of the problem. And that was part of what was lost in the Reformation, that they weren't lying like I thought they were. I thought they were just making stuff up, as liberals are wont to do sometimes. And so, but it was at that point that somebody handed me a book by this youngish Polish Pope. And they said, you ought to read this. Well, I read it, The Crossing the Threshold of Hope. And I crossed an epistemological threshold. I thought, this is mesmerizing. I knew I only was probably getting about half of it because I didn't have the categories to understand everything he was talking about. I had no background in personalism, Thomism. These are the categories he processes reality through. And so but it started me on a journey of reading him over the next 20 years. As I say, he got inside my head. I couldn't get him out. Sometimes Elizabeth would be walking through the living room and I'm in the reading chair and I've had a tear coming down my cheek and she said, "Oh, you're reading John Paul II." And I said, yeah. And I love that.
Yes. So you've mentioned JP2's anthropology a couple of times, and maybe some of our listeners aren't quite as familiar with what we mean by that. Could you give maybe, I know it's a big, broad subject, but maybe just kind of a brief synopsis of what you mean by that, because I think that will help kind of solidify your understanding of marriage and family and all of that.
Well, in his catechesis on marriage and family, he camps in a couple of biblical texts in Genesis 1 and 2, the creation of man and woman in his image. And this is in a Trinitarian image. So at the heart of God is love, and at the heart of love is relationships to the other. And that's why God could love before there was a creation, because he loved within himself. There was another there. And that we are made in that image. We're made for the other. We're made to love the other. And that's why man wasn't complete until, Adam wasn't complete until Eve was made. So to be a person for John Paul II is to be incomplete. It's to be made for the other.
Yes.
And it's to find oneself in the giving of oneself as a pure gift to the other. This is his kind of language. And so you see that in Genesis, and he expounds that with great depth and beauty. I was a budding Hebraist as a young man, so I spent a lot of time in the biblical languages. And that, I could keep up with him on the exegesis part, but then he went into his kind of phenomenological analysis, and I go, wow, this is like a whole new dimension of what these texts are about, So then he goes to Song of Solomon, and the Song of Solomon he does an exegesis on those to kind of even deepen a little bit more about what this communion of male and female looks like, and helps us to see. In fact, he's got this wonderful insight that when Adam first sees Eve and he says, "This is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh," the very first words of Adam are a song, he says. And it's a song in response to the woman. And this song is later picked up and developed in the Song of Songs.
Yeah.
So he bridges the Song of Solomon and Genesis 1 and 2, and he's full of stuff like this, because he's such a biblically saturated mind.
Yes.
That he sees these connections. And so the Song of Solomon is about, the relationship, which is, psychological and moral and sexual and everything. Then he goes from that into Matthew and Jesus teaching about divorce and that marriage is indissoluble, and they ask him, well, but Moses permitted it. And I love, this is really a wonderful insight of his that Jesus didn't go back to Leviticus or Exodus and debate case law. He went back to original intent.
Yes.
And said, yeah, but in the beginning, God made them male and female in his image. So he gives us also a great insight into Jesus' own hermeneutic, and which ought to be our hermeneutic.
Yes.
And so he comes back full circle to the Genesis story and Song of Solomon. Then, of course, he ends in Ephesians 5, which is this great mystery that Paul elaborates between the man and the woman, but he also says it's about Christ and the church. And you read it, and you go, okay, what is this? Is he talking about Christ and the church or man and the woman? If you read the Greek, it gets a little bit tangled, and I think it's because the syntax fails him. That the mystery is deeper and more profound than what Greek is able to actually reveal, and because he comes up with saying, yeah, it's both. Yeah. The marriage union, and so all of this is to be made in the image of God is to be a person that's made for love. It's to be incomplete. It's to be made also for union with God first, but also union with one another in the sacrament of marriage. So his anthropology is very Christological. He says no one really knows themselves until they know themselves in Christ, because Christ is the true meaning of every human being.
Yes.
So I'd say his anthropology is Christological.
Yeah.
So those are just a few forays into his anthropology.
For sure, and each one of those, I'm sure we could spend a whole
totally.
couple of hours on.
Yeah, he did. So.
Exactly.